Stones set up as a memorial to mark the occasion for, when future generations might ask about it. Pretty much the same idea as most, memorials and statues and things like that. What's up, cool people? My name's Matt. Welcome back to our Bible study. Okay. Now we're looking at Joshua chapter 4. So, Israelites have crossed the Jordan River now, and they are near Jericho. That's kind of where things stand at the moment. Not too much else that needs to be explained. So, here we go, I guess. Joshua chapter 4. When all the people had crossed the Jordan, the Lord said to Joshua, "Now choose 12 men, one from each tribe. Tell them, take 12 stones from the very place where the priests are standing in the middle of the Jordan. Carry them out and pile them up at the place where you will camp tonight." So the priests are still in the Jordan River right now. But it was mentioned earlier at some point in Deuteronomy that once they crossed the Jordan, they were supposed to set up an altar made of uncut stones. And this is what I assume they're in the process of doing right now. So, pretty self-explanatory what happens there. 12 men chosen. Each one takes a stone from the river, and I guess then once they set up camp, they're going to pile up the stones and make an altar of sorts out of it. Then verse 4. So Joshua called together the 12 men he had chosen, one from each of the tribes of Israel. He told them, "Go into the middle of the Jordan, in front of the ark of the Lord your God. Each of you must pick up one stone and carry it out on your shoulder, 12 stones in all, one for each of the tribes of Israel. We will use these stones to build a memorial. In the future, your children will ask you, 'What do these stones mean?' Then you could tell them, 'They remind us that the Jordan River stopped flowing when the Ark of the Lord's covenant went across. These stones will stand as a memorial among the people of Israel forever.'" So, really the altar/memorial is just there to mark this particular occasion, saying how God allowed them to cross the Jordan River on dry ground. And there's actually a couple of things that I'm familiar with that actually derive their names from this particular moment in the Bible. I think there's actually a Christian rock band, or at least was at one point a Christian rock band called 12 Stones. That's based off of this. The church that I go to also derives its name from this, but it went with Stonewater for the name of the church because, the stones were taken out of a place where there's normally water. But yeah, I don't recall an altar being set up when they crossed the Red Sea, but then again, with that being more of a sea instead of a river, and given the context that, they had just, finished running away from the armies of Egypt, it maybe wasn't the best context to try and set up an altar there. They did set one up at Mount Sinai, if I remember right. So, I mean, close enough. But anyway, so yeah. Stones set up as a memorial to mark the occasion for, when future generations might ask about it. Pretty much the same idea as most, memorials and statues and things like that are set up for. It's to remember a particular event or person or something like that stood out within the history of a place or a people group. Anyway. Alright. Moving on to verse 8. So the men did as Joshua had commanded them. They took 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan River, one for each tribe, just as the Lord had told Joshua. They carried them to the place where they camped for the night and constructed the memorial there. Joshua also set up another pile of 12 stones in the middle of the Jordan, at the place where the priests who carried the Ark of the Covenant were standing, and they are there to this day. This day being in the context of, like, probably more so the original readers. I can't guarantee that those stones are still there, like, in current modern day. They might be. But I know, based on previous conversations we've had in live streams, that the Jordan River is much drier nowadays than it was before. So it's possible that in the midst of one of those dry seasons, those stones could have gotten moved, or just from the fact of being in the river, that those stones would have, like, eroded or something. But in any case, so there was actually another altar pile thing set up in the river itself by Joshua. Maybe that's more so where Stonewater Church gets its name from. Because the stones are actually in the water in that case. Anywho. Okay. On to verse 10. The priests who were carrying the ark stood in the middle of the river until all the Lord's commands that Moses had given to Joshua were carried out. Meanwhile, the people hurried across the riverbed, and when everyone was safely on the other side, the priests crossed over with the ark of the Lord as the people watched. The armed warriors from... you know what? Let me pause for a sec before getting into that next bit. So, it didn't say it outright before, but it seems like with the way that verses 10 and 11 here are worded, that some of this stuff happened kind of simultaneously. Like, while the bulk of the people were crossing the Jordan River, there were also the tribal leaders gathering the stones. And there was also Joshua setting up the stones in the riverbed. So, yeah. And then after all that, the priests finally make the rest of the walk across the riverbed. Okay. Now I feel like I can get into verse 12. The armed warriors from the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh led the Israelites across the Jordan, just as Moses had directed. These armed men, about 40,000 strong, were ready for battle, and the Lord was with them as they crossed over to the plains of Jericho. That day the Lord made Joshua a great leader in the eyes of all the Israelites, and the rest of his life they revered him as much as they had revered Moses. And it doesn't even say specifically what Joshua did that made him stand out as a great leader to the people. Other than, I guess, that, you know, like, he gave these commands to the people, pretty much said what was going to happen and how it was going to happen, and it happened exactly that way. And of course it mentions these tribes and their armies specifically because those were the ones that the rest of their people had settled on the east side of the Jordan River before crossing, but they were still going over with everybody else. These armies were going over with the rest of the tribes to help lead the charge to, you know, settle the rest of the promised land opposite the Jordan River. Alright, so people cross over. Stones are set up and or taken out of the Jordan River. Now, they're pretty much officially just a bit outside Jericho. And then we get to verse 15. The Lord had said to Joshua, "Command the priests carrying the Ark of the Covenant to come up out of the riverbed." So Joshua gave the command. As soon as the priests carrying the Ark of the Lord's Covenant came up out of the riverbed and their feet were on high ground, the water of the Jordan returned and overflowed its banks as before. The people crossed the Jordan on the 10th day of the first month. Then they camped at Gilgal, just east of Jericho. It was there at Gilgal that Joshua piled up the 12 stones taken from the Jordan River. Footnote there at Ark of the Covenant, Hebrew says Ark of the Testimony. That was more so just the way that they referred to it. Maybe the original Hebrew wording, the word that we use as covenant here, might have more accurately translated to testimony if you just take the Hebrew word in and of itself. But same thing, different name, basically. So I kept thinking at various points here that, okay, priests have probably crossed over and we're done with this. But then there's more stuff that's happening in the river. Okay, maybe now they've crossed over. No, there's more stuff that's happening. All right, well, now it's pretty clear that, Joshua has now told the priests to leave the riverbed. And then it also gives the context of when, at least going by the Jewish calendar, that they crossed the Jordan River. Footnote gives a little more clarity on this for a modern context. This day in the ancient Hebrew lunar calendar occurred in late March, April, or early May. Because, again, the calendar worked a bit different, so that's why there's kind of the spread of possibility of when it happened. But it would have been springtime, basically. And then Gilgal is a place that will come up at other points later on in the Bible. Some pretty important stuff happens there, but I'm not going to get into that right now. Suppose it's about time I wrap up the chapter here. Verse 21. Then Joshua said to the Israelites, "In the future your children will ask, 'What do these stones mean?' Then you can tell them, 'This is where the Israelites crossed the Jordan on dry ground. For the Lord your God dried up the river right before your eyes, and he kept it dry until you were all across, just as he did at the Red Sea when he dried it up until we had all crossed over. He did this so all the nations of the earth might know that the Lord's hand is powerful, and so you might fear the Lord your God forever.'" So now it outright states the similarities between this situation and them crossing the Red Sea as they left Egypt. And it already kind of covered the whole future generations asking what it means thing earlier in the chapter, so I don't feel like I need to elaborate too much more on that. This was just Joshua saying that to everybody else, not God telling Joshua to tell the people this or whatever. Or even Joshua just telling it to the leaders. But yeah, especially, with it saying earlier on that that the riverbed was overflowing, that it overflowed its banks. Like, this wasn't a low-sitting river at the time, is what that pretty much means. So, if God had not dried that up for them to cross like that, it would have been a whole lot more difficult for them to get across. Not that they couldn't have, but there's probably a whole lot more stuff that they would have had to do. A whole lot of other figurative hoops to jump through to make that work. Footnote at Red Sea says the original Hebrew is Sea of Reeds. Again, renamed in this translation for a modern audience to get an understanding of where that was. So, yeah. The Israelites have now officially 100% crossed the Jordan River, and they've set up a couple of altars to mark the occasion. One on the land across the river, and Joshua, just by his own doing, I guess, also setting up something in the river itself. But yeah, that does it for Joshua chapter 4. Okay, so we got more details, kind of, on the Israelites crossing the Jordan River. Also, Joshua set up a monument in the river to mark the occasion. There was also another altar monument thing set up, beside, maybe not directly beside, but close-ish to the Jordan River to mark the occasion, so that, it stands as a landmark for people to remember it in future generations. But, yeah. As always, like, share if you enjoyed the video. Subscribe to the channel, click the bell if you're on YouTube to get updates when I post new videos. If you see this over on Rumble, give me a follow there. Make sure you look down in the description to get info on other social media pages and how to find and follow those. And, of course, down below there, leave comments with any thoughts you have. So that's going to do it for now. Hope you're all doing well. Hopefully I'll see you soon for another video. But whatever the case is, till next time, stay cool, people.